Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's just take a moment while everybody's signing on. Please make sure at this time that your microphones are off, videos are off, your tables and chairs are in their full upright position. We're going to give it a few more minutes while everybody signs on and gets comfy cozy. Make sure you have coffee and your favorite morning treat on hand. Oh, Lewis, I like the background. Please make sure we have videos off. There we go. Thank you. Hi, Stanley. I like your porch. Very good. Thank you. All right, a few more people still joining. We have a lot of registrants this morning, so we're really excited. All right, let's see here. How are we doing? If at any time you have any trouble with your microphone or want to ask a question, just shoot me a chat. You can do it privately or publicly. I'm monitoring the chat room. If you have any questions, just let me know. Here we go. Oh, good morning, Karen. Bye, Karen. Everyone, please make sure you have your microphones off and your cameras off. We're doing this just so that it's easier for everyone to keep up with the conversation of Sal and Wendy. We have a lot of special guests this morning. We are so excited. This really is a treat for all of us. So we want to make sure we can make the most of our time. Please make sure you have your mics and cameras off. All right. Wow. All right, still going. We'll give it about one more minute and then I'll just start allowing people in after we've begun. Oh, good morning, Andy. Bye, Andy. Thanks for stopping by. Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for making time in your Monday mornings, making us a part of it. We really do appreciate it. Hello, Karen and Mark. I like your fruit clock. All right, here we go. Couple more. I don't know if you can hear the doorbell. Every time somebody signs on, you hear the little ding dong of a new participant wanting to join in. Here we go. Great. All right, have a couple more coming in. All right, and let's give it a go. The rest we'll just admit them into the room as they come, such as Linda, who just joined on. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Darren St. George from St. George Living History Productions. We are so excited to have you with us today because for the third week in a row, we never would have thought this was occurring. We are talking again, second week, but third conversation. We are talking about George Burns, and we could not be more thrilled to do so. Of course, we have Sal St. George with over 35 years of experience in the biz. He has done writing, directing, producing, performing. He has done it all, and he'll be sharing his thoughts and understandings of George and his life and career. But on top of that, we also have his great niece, Wendy, and members of her family joining us to share their memories and experiences with the great comic legend. So we are really thrilled. If you have any questions, please shoot them in the chat window. If you have any trouble at any time listening, hearing anybody, just let me know. Again, shoot a little message in the chat window. But I don't want to waste any more time with me, so let's start with Sal. Dad, are you there? Hop on aboard. Here we go.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Ward, glad to see everybody is here. We're doing terrific. The numbers are really coming in for us. Yeah. It's a special day. We're excited about it. Oh, first of all, it's Memorial Day. Let's pay tribute to those gallant men and women. There's nothing more you can say about it. It's a special day for everybody. We're going to be trying to give you a little insight into what George Burns was like personally, and you can't get any better than having his family as part of this. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you a little Cliff Note version of where we stand with George Burns. If you saw last week, we pretty much talked about the Burns and Allen connection. We're going to move forward with that, and I want to give you a little background on what George Burns was like as a performer, and then we'll get the family in here. So we're going to do a little Cliff Note version. Darren, can we have the first screen, please?
You got it. Let's go.
So George was influential in doing quite a few things that never happened before on the screen. For example, on TV, he would do what he did in vaudeville. He would talk directly to the audience. So it had never been done before. And even today, quite a few other performers are doing that on their programs. But he was the first to do that. And he brought that style of vaudeville that was not prevalent in TV before. What he did was, for example, Blanche, their next door neighbor, had 4 different actors portraying her husband during the course of the run. And the first one was, Hal March, and then John Brown, and then Fred Clark, who you may remember, he did quite a few movies and all. Fred Clark became the third version of Blanche's husband. Now, what's interesting about it, Fred was getting so many offers that he had to leave the show. What George did was, the show is running, it's on, Blanche comes in, the new actor portraying her husband, Larry Keating, is brought in. He tells everybody in the TV show watching, he says, this is the new Blanche's new husband, Harry. And Fred Clark is gone. He went on to do other things, but he's going to be your husband from now on. And then he said, okay, let's do the show now. And they just continued. He just stopped everything and just said, this is the new guy, and that's it. And he moved on. It had never been done before on TV, but that was what George would do. He was very, very instrumental in that. Fred Clark, by the way, went on and he was making movies with Bob Hope and Rosemary Clooney, Martin and Lewis. He did very well for himself, Abbott and Costello. All right, the next slide, Darren. The team of Burns and Allen on television, here's just 4, and there were quite a few more TV Guide covers that they were on, not talking about other magazine covers. And all because of Gracie's illogical logic. For example, a friend asked her, doctor, if a woman should have children after 35. She said, 35 children is enough for any woman. They also said, they laughed at Joan of Arc, but she went right ahead and built it anyway. She said, I believe we should put Congress on a commission basis, pay them for their results. If they do a good job, give them a 10% bonus. And last, her recipe for cooking a roast beef. You get a large roast beef and you get a small roast beef. You put the 2 roast beefs in the oven. When the little one burns, the big one is done. That was what kept them alive. Next slide, please, Darren. That's what people were tuning in for. They had a wonderful family. Here's young pictures of Ronnie and Sandy, and then as adults in family circle. Sandy was not as theatrical as her brother. She did a couple of TV shows, but Ronnie went on to doing quite a few TV shows. And if you look to the lower right-hand corner, that's Ronnie on the Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason and Art Carney. That's the episode where Ralph decides he wants to become young again, and he's going to learn how to roller skate, and they all go to the roller skating rink. That was his forte into this. Everything is going swimmingly. The TV show is on for 8 years. And then Gracie decides she's had enough. It was a difficult job for her. The problem with the show was everything was predicated on her memorizing an entire script, and the stories all centered around Gracie. It was different when she was in radio, different when she's in vaudeville. In radio, you had the script in your hand. On TV, she had to memorize everything. She was having migraines. She had minor strokes. And then she told George, I can't do this anymore. The show ended, and August 27th of 1964, Gracie passed away. There's different theories on her age. Some say she was 59. Some I've seen from 59 to 62. Why? The reason there's the discrepancy. She was born in San Francisco in 1906, the same year as the San Francisco earthquake. Everything was destroyed during the earthquake, so nobody really knew. There were no birth certificates left. Nothing was salvaged. Nobody really knew her exact day of birth. Okay, I think now would be a perfect time to go to the last slide that I want to show, because at this point, George, the big question in show business, can George Burns survive without Gracie? It's on all the magazines. He tries doing a TV show by himself. It lasts one season. People really missed having Gracie there. And that's where we're going to leave it. And we're going to bring in the family. Can I have the next slide, Darren? And you could bring in the next, and you can introduce everybody. Let's bring in David and Elise and Wendy and the rest of the family so that they can meet our guests. There's David and Wendy. You could, yep, David, there's Elise. Okay, perfect. David, you want to intro, Wendy, do you want to introduce
One second, I think we're waiting for Amy to join.
All right.
Is Amy in?
I'm waiting.
Not yet. All right, she may be having trouble. We'll come back to her. Oh, nope.
There she is.
Okay, here I am. I'm Wendy's sister. So I'm also his great niece.
And next to me, I'm David, and next to me is my lovely wife, Wendy.
So let's start with Wendy. Wendy.
We also didn't introduce Elise and her family.
Okay, yes, Darren.
Hi.
Okay, would you tell everybody who's in the photograph?
Oh, so that is George Burns, obviously. And I'm next to him with my husband, David. And that's my daughter, Elise, who's on the call, and my son, Lee. And they were 11 and 8 at the time.
Okay, and Darren, the next photo?
That's my parents.
Oh.
Yeah, with George Burns.
So
Or Nat, as we referred to him.
Nat?
Right, we
Uncle
always
Nat.
called him Nat in the family.
Because his name is?
It's Nathan Birnbaum.
Nathan Birnbaum. Tell us how you fit into the family.
So my grandmother, George Burns was one of 12 children. My grandmother was the second oldest. Her name was Annie. And George Burns was the 9th child. So my father, that you just saw the picture of, George Burns was his uncle.
Wow.
And he was my great uncle.
So how did it feel having a comedy legend as an uncle?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
How did it feel having him as part of the family?
Oh, well, it was fun. It was interesting. You were always meeting people that also in those years, people had them. But I'll tell an interesting story. When I was 7 years old, Nat was coming to visit one of his sisters at, their houses, and everybody always got together when he came into town. So they were there, and I sat on Gracie Allen's lap. It was so sweet. It was very memorable. I was very excited. I was 7 years old. The next day that I had show and tell at school. So I got up and I said to the class that I sat on Gracie Allen's lap yesterday, and the teacher told me to sit down because I was lying. So I went home and I told my mom the story, and my mom called the teacher and said, no, she was not lying. It was true.
Wow.
But they were always very warm. They were, it was always like a very warm and loving family. They were very close. Gracie Allen was a pretty petite woman, very soft-spoken, nothing like the character that she portrayed. Would you agree, Amy?
Well, I'm younger, so I don't really remember meeting Gracie Allen. But I was just going to say that, Wendy said there were 12 children, and our grandmother, Annie, who I was named for, she was one of the oldest, and he was more towards the end. But my father used to describe himself as being a love child because he had an older sister and brother who were 11 and 12 years older than him. So my father, according to the legend, was George Burns's favorite nephew. Now, maybe all his nephews said that, but we believe my father. By the way, my father was probably as funny or funnier than George Burns. He was a very, very funny man, as the whole family was funny. All our great aunts and uncles, everyone was funny. It was just a lot of fun growing up in that kind of family. But when my father would tell us stories that when Uncle Nat became, started to make money and became famous, he would have my father do errands for him, run around, make sure whatever, the backstage was ready, wherever he was playing, and do all these things. And my father would get paid with his old suits. So if you can imagine, their age difference was probably about 15 to 17 years. And my father would jokingly say, here he was walking around in a $300 suit with $1 in his pocket. So it was stories like that we would hear all the time. One other quick one I'll just throw out is Maxwell House Coffee was the sponsor of the Burns and Allen show. So in all our relatives' homes, including ours, was always a can of Maxwell House coffee. But my mother loved chock full of nuts coffee. So I remember one time I'd say to her, why are you always pouring the chock full of nuts coffee into the Maxwell House coffee can? And she said, oh, in case Uncle Nat comes by, we all have to have Maxwell House coffee.
Did any of you know Ronnie or Sandy?
I never met them.
No, just from TV, and I thought Ronnie was really handsome.
Yeah. Yeah, he did pretty well for himself on those shows. Do you know anything about George when he had to get a new partner, when he was trying to find somebody else to work with? Darren, can we have the next slide, please? Here is some of the partners that he tried working with. We've got Goldie Hawn and Jane Russell, Bernadette Peters, Connie Haynes, Dorothy Provine, Carol Channing. He went through quite a few people over the years trying to get his career back on track. Unfortunately, he was still using the same material in many cases that he did with Gracie, and the public did not accept any of these people in those roles. It was later on that he was able to adapt new material, for example, with Goldie, to make it work.
Yeah, so I have something to say about that. He did a TV show, I think it was in 1964, called Wendy and Me. And it lasted one season. I think Connie Stevens was in the show. I could be wrong, but you're the historian, so.
Yeah, can you go to the next slide, Darren? There it is, Wendy and Me.
Okay, so when he decided to do that show, the legend in our family, which I truly believe, because my father told me, and he wasn't a liar, he was funny, but he didn't lie, was that Uncle Nat called up one of our great aunts, it was either Aunt Tressa or Aunt Mamie, there were so many of them, and said, what are Annie's granddaughters' names? And she told him, and we had cousins, so it was Sandra, Jessica, Amy, and Wendy. And he said, I'm naming my new TV show after Wendy, this Wendy that's right here with us today. And the show only lasted a year, and I—
Yes. 1 year, yeah.
Amy and Me, maybe it would have been a bigger hit. But anyway, I think that's a great thing that he named the show for my sister, and very proud of that.
Wow. Yeah.
As I said, that gene was passed down. We could tell my sister has it.
Wendy, how did you feel about the show being named after you?
It was exciting, but I was kind of like a shy, reserved child. So I was almost like a little embarrassed. But it was very exciting to know that it was named for me.
Did people believe you when you said that?
Well, they would when I told, let's say like my close friends, but I wasn't one to go around telling just anybody that it was named for me. But in those days, you went to school with people, like I went to school with a kid whose uncle was Buddy Hackett. You know, there was always somebody who had somebody famous in their family. So especially from that Borscht Belt kind of area where we lived in Brooklyn, there was all these famous Jewish comedians. So
What part of Brooklyn did you come from?
excuse me?
What part of Brooklyn?
We came from Crown Heights.
Okay, people like to know that.
Yes, but the interesting thing to me is that well, I would say from elementary school to maybe even high school, I would be with somebody would come up to me and say, "Oh, I heard you were related to George Burns," and I'd say, "Oh, yes, I am," and they go, "Well, so am I." So sometimes it wasn't as close a relation as it was for me, but sometimes there was. Like Amy went to school; it's a different thing. But again, they found a relative that they had sort of lost, and there was always these Jewish connections.
So
That was
so
fun.
I would just add to that my father was an attorney, and as I said earlier, he was a favorite. And George Burns, this is the story that we've been told as kids, that George Burns said, "I'm going to take one of my nieces and nephews," and I think back then he meant nephew, not nieces, "and I'm going to help him get a job, and I'm going to get him a job with the William Morris Agency," which was the agency that, you know, represented him. So my father, his name was Leonard, but his family called him Huey because there were a lot of Lennys in the family. And he said, "And I'm going to have Louis get this job with the William Morris Agency." But one of his cousins, a guy named Louis Weiss, his mother, one of the only siblings who died relatively young, because they all lived to be very old, which was unusual for back then. She had died, and the sisters, his aunts, my father's aunts, Uncle Nat's sisters, all got together and said, "You know what? Lenny's a lawyer. He'll always have a job. Give the job to Lou. He needs a job, and he just lost his mother." Well, needless to say, Lou Weiss became the chair of the William Morris Agency, extremely successful man. And I think it pissed my father off most of his life because he lost his chance at show business, or at least his way of getting in. My father did fine in life, but he was always a little resentful, I think. And ironically, with the way social media is now, that one day on LinkedIn, I got a request from somebody whose last name was Weiss, and he actually runs some kind of cannabis company out in LA. Well, he's the grandson of Lou Weiss. And I said to him, because he referenced it in his LinkedIn profile, that his father worked for the William Morris Agency and his grandfather was the chair. And anyway, so I texted him and I said, "Do you know I'm your cousin, whatever?" And he said, "Yes, I figured that out." So they're all over the place because when you're a family of 12 children, they're all over the place. And my niece, Wendy and David's daughter, Elise, was at a party, a couple of years ago, and ran into another great niece, great niece, I guess in her case, who was her grandmother, a great grandmother, was also one of George Burns's sisters. So
it's the same relation, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So we run into these people because it was such a large family.
Okay, let's move on to the next stage of George's life. At this point, his TV show, The George Burns Show, is canceled. Wendy and Me is canceled, and he's struggling to find his footing. At the same time, his best friend for his entire life, Jack Benny, is scheduled to make a motion picture, and Jack unfortunately has cancer. He passes away. George takes his place in The Sunshine Boy, and that kind of resurrects his career. He wins the Oscar as Best Supporting Actor. At that point, he was the oldest living recipient to receive the award. And then from that point, there's a very rare picture there of Jack and Walter Matthau. They actually started working together when Jack took ill. once that all happened, let's go to the next slide, Darren. George wins the award, and let's go to the next slide. He ends up, there he is, getting his Oscar. Did you folks see this when it was happening?
Yes.
And what was the reaction? This is your uncle up there receiving an Academy Award.
Wendy, did you have a reaction you want to talk about?
I just remember being very excited. I mean, not everybody has an uncle who wins an Oscar. And, you know, it was always like fun to see, to watch. Very rarely did George Burns ever talk about his family at the end of the Burns and Allen show, but every once in a while he did. And when he did, it was always fun to listen because you knew the people he was talking about. So, you know, to have that connection was really special. And the fact with the Sunshine Boys, where he was given such celebrity that it gave him the opportunity to go on to future endeavors.
That was the first time he appeared in public without his toupee as well.
Oh, interesting.
Didn't realize.
Yeah. So because of the success, because of the Oscar, next slide, Darren, please. All of a sudden, the world opens up for George Burns as a single act. Yeah, next slide. There we go. And he starts making a series of motion pictures. Oh God pretty much launches him. He ends up doing 2 or 3 two sequels to Oh God. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a wonderful movie Going in Style with Lee Strasberg and Art Carney. I'll tell you a funny story about that particular movie. I was young when that film came out, and Rex Reed, the critic, wrote a review about the movie. And in the review, I don't know if I'm going to give out spoilers here. In the movie, one by one, Lee Strasberg passes away, Art Carney passes away, leaving George by himself. And he put that all in the review. And I wrote to Rex Reed, and I still have his response, a letter he sent me. He said he got a lot of complaints from people saying you gave away the plot. Why did you do that? He said, I'll be more careful in the future. But that was a terrific movie, Going in Style. And did you have a story about Oh God, you said?
So I do. I have a story about Oh God. So God. So when that movie came out, my son Lee was 4 years old in nursery school. And it was back to school night. And so, you know, the teacher is talking and all the parents are there. And she goes, oh, I have a very funny story to tell. We were talking about God. And one of the children says, oh, I'm related to God. And the teacher said, yes, honey, we're all related to God. And my son then piped up, no, I'm really related to God. George Burns is my uncle. And so then the teacher reiterated the story of back to school night. So it was very funny.
Now, this is when you were living in New Jersey?
Yes, we were living in Fairlawn, New Jersey at the time.
I just want to jump in when we have a quick sec. We have a question from Lisa. She heard that George only drove Cadillacs and bought a new one every year. Is there any truth to that story?
No idea.
Wow. Wow. All right. Yeah, it seems like if it were true, the family would certainly know about such a thing. Wow.
You got to remember, he's on the West Coast and we're on the East Coast.
Where's
So
that magnet that says, here's this funny saying about, it's nice to have a love, caring family, Amy, right? Love,
Oh,
caring
yeah, no,
family.
he had this thing that said happiness is having a loving, close-knit family living in another city.
All right, so
I don't recall knowing about what cars he drove. So, I know you probably know this because you're a historian of this, but he and Gracie lived next door to Ronald Reagan when he was married to what was her name?
Jane Wyatt.
Yes, Jane Wyatt. And so we used to hear a couple of things about that, but yeah.
Like, what did you hear?
Oh, I can't repeat it. Now, I guess they didn't have such a great marriage. Obviously, they got divorced and there was a lot of screaming and yelling that was coming out of that house. from the stories that we heard. But, you know, he went on and married Nancy and became president, so everything worked out well.
Do you know anything about, they claim that after Gracie passed away, Jane Wyman, that's right, it was Jane Wyman, not Jane Wyatt, Jane Wyman.
Right.
That after Gracie passed away, he would continually go to the mausoleum and he would speak to her. Did you know anything about that?
Yeah, that was something that was talked about in the family. He was truly, from what we understand, truly in love with her. And not only did he make a living with her and his fame, everything he attributed that was good in his life, he always said came from her.
Yeah, he had no problem giving her all the credit for their their success. I want to move into the next phase.
Hang on, we have a few more questions coming in before we move on, because I'll never keep up with all the chats if we don't do them as they come in. Is it true that George Burns worked out a lot to stay in shape? Do we know of anything of that? Nope. All right. There's another story.
I did read that, to be honest with you, in my research. Yeah, he did do quite a bit of exercising all the time. Yeah. He had his own schedule of events. You know, he would work out. He would go to Hillcrest Country Club. He'd play bridge or with the guys. He had a whole system that he would use every day when he wasn't working. Go ahead.
Also, he was a very healthy eater, from what I understood. Ate very healthy. And one other thing I would say is, two of his siblings moved to California. His brother, Willie Burns, who became a TV producer. He produced like Mr. Ed and a lot of those TV shows. And then one of his sisters moved out there. And I remember my father would speak sometimes to this aunt, and she'd say, oh yeah, I played bridge today. Oh, who'd you play bridge with, Aunt Goldie? Oh, I was playing with Cary Grant and, you know, Groucho Marx or whatever. It was like as if you'd be saying I was playing with, you know, just neighbors, that these were the people that they hung out with.
You're right about the producing the programs. He had created his own production company, George, and he was responsible for Mr. Ed and the Bob Cummings show, People's Choice. He even created a series based on No Time for Sergeants, which was very short-lived. The problem they had with No Time for Sergeants is the show is well produced, well done, but who was the original star of No Time for Sergeants? It was Andy Griffith. When they put the show on the air, it was opposite the Andy Griffith show. And he had no chance of surviving at that point in that time slot, going up against the memory of Andy Griffith, and there he was doing his own show.
We have a couple more notes here. Robert said he actually got to see George Burns at the Lincoln Center, and Jack Benny introduced him. We talked about their close friendship. He says George loved to play practical jokes on Jack, and actually played a practical joke on him that night during the introduction. So that's fun.
What was the joke?
It doesn't say. It doesn't say. Robert, we want to know, what was the joke? So type it in. Also, Joseph points out that the best line from Oh God is, why did you stop performing miracles? And God says, what are you talking about? I gave you the 69 Mets.
Yeah, that is a good line. You know what? Larry Gelbart, again, brilliant writer, and Carl Reiner is the director. I mean, you've got great comedy minds all lining up to help George Burns create these programs, these movies. Terrific. Go ahead.
Did George smoke cigars all day, or were they just used primarily as a prop while he was performing?
All the time.
We never saw him without one.
Wow.
I remember when we met him that one time, all I remember is like the smoke going up into like my nose, and my eyes were all watery because he was like, the cigar was definitely lit when we met.
And that was when we were in Las Vegas.
Oh, great. Thank you. Las Vegas. Do we want to talk about Las Vegas?
Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so George becomes a headliner in Las Vegas. There's a couple of chips there that you can see with his opening act is Petula Clark. And the next one, it's Peggy Lee. And if you will go to the next slide, please. His opening act, here it is, Charo. And
Isn't
this
that-
is, yeah, and this is when you all went to go see him performing in Las Vegas, correct?
That is
Yeah.
correct.
All right, Dave, you're on.
So we were on our way back. I had relocated to California, and then my daughter didn't like California, so we relocated back to New York or New Jersey. And we all didn't like California. So we're driving back and we go through Las Vegas, and we're passing by the Caesar's Hotel, Caesar Casino. And Wendy says, George Burns is performing. And she says to me, find a hotel. We're staying here tonight because I want to see George tonight. So I said, where? We pulled into the Sands Hotel, got a room. She calls her father up. Her father says, speak to his manager and say that Yui sent you. Well, Yui is the nickname, as they had said before, of Wendy's father that they always called him. So we get the kids all dressed up. We went to the hotel. We went to the box office. And Wendy asked to speak to the manager. The manager, what's the manager's name?
Irving Fine.
Irving Fine. And he comes out and he asks us several questions. And we said, Yui sent us. We'd like to see if we could see Uncle George. He said,
Okay.
come back, Uncle Matt. He said, come back at 8 o'clock at night and I'll bring you backstage. The show didn't start until around 9 o'clock. So we came back at 8:30. The kids were all dressed up. Elise, her brother Lee, Wendy, and I, as you saw the outfit that we wore in the picture prior. We go backstage and Nat says to Lee and Elise, come sit on Uncle George's lap.
Give me a
Give
hug.
Give me
We're
a hug.
family.
We're family. So we go back and Elise and them are sitting on his lap. He's in his cigar
Smoking
jacket and he's smoking his cigar. And we talked to him for about 15, 20 minutes. And he says, I've got to get ready to perform. So he says, are you going to see the show? And we said, well, we can't really. The kids are young. He said, don't worry about it. Calls his agent in, his manager in, and it says, set up four chairs on the side of the stage. They set up the 4 chairs and we're sitting there, and the first to perform is Charo. So we didn't know it, and she didn't know we were back there. In the middle of her act, she changes her clothes.
When she goes off stage to change.
She goes off stage to change her clothes, and she exposed herself a little bit to my son, and all we could say was, wow.
My son was 11 at the time.
I don't think he recovered yet.
He saw things he never expected to see.
Wow,
So-
Darren, can we have that slide again of Charo?
Yeah, just to get an impression here.
Yeah, there
Yes,
she is.
exactly. So you can imagine somebody walking on stage and popping their blouse open, and he's sitting in direct eyesight.
That's a lot of education.
More than we wanted to give him at 11
It was
years old.
very memorable.
Elise, you were back there?
What'd you say? Sorry.
Were you back there also?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember that. That probably wasn't as impressionable for me. But I do remember sitting backstage and like watching the show and, sitting on his lap and him telling me to hug him because we're family. Like,
How old were you at that time?
I was 8.
Okay. So at that point, you already knew this was not just an ordinary guy. This was he was a big entertainer.
Yes. Yeah.
Did they treat you differently when you were at the hotel?
Well, we were at the Sands, so he was performing at Caesar's, so we didn't even speak to them on that.
Oh, okay. All right. All right.
I have one story my son wanted me to tell.
Okay.
When I was in elementary school, the house next to my elementary school lived his parents, Charlie Schlatter. I don't know if you remember him, but he played alongside George Burns in 18 Again.
Mhm.
And so one day, I guess it must have been like right before Christmas break, he was home visiting his parents, and he came to like outside while we were all at recess. And he came out, and it was like right after 18 again came out. So all my friends were like, wanted me to go introduce myself to him and tell him I'm related to George Burns. I was like my mom, very shy and reserved, so I did not go introduce myself. But you know, it was kind of coincidental that he lived right next to our elementary school. You know, like you know, right next to, and he had just played with George Burns, so it was, you know, interesting. But I was too shy to actually go up and approach him.
Now, did anybody in your family go into entertainment?
My son, my oldest son, I think I mentioned before we started, he's an attorney. He works with hedge funds, and he's decided he wants to be ultimately a comedy writer, but he's now doing stand-up, and it came out of nowhere. And, you know, my father, as we said, was very funny. Wendy and David's son, Lee, is very funny. And my son, Jeff, is very funny. So we always kid around that's about having the Birnbaum gene. And, but no, he's not a headliner yet, but you never know. One day you may see him as a headliner.
You never know. You never know.
No, other than, you know, as I said, his brother, Willie Burns. Other than that, I'm not aware of anybody else in the family who got into the entertainment world.
Before we leave Las Vegas, I just wanted to, every week I always recommend a book to everybody. And I'm showing this one here. It's Anne Margaret's autobiography. It's Anne Margaret, My Story. And she writes glowingly about George in this book. He gave her her first big start in the business. What's kind of interesting about it, when she auditioned for George, she was wearing dance clothes. She was wearing an oversized sweater that we kind of remember Anne Margaret wearing with tight slacks. And when he brought her to Vegas, he told her to wear that outfit. And after she did her first set with him, Gracie got him on the side, and she said, "Why is she wearing that, George?" He said, "Well, I thought it looked nice on her. That's how she auditioned." She said, "No, people are going to get the wrong impression. George, get her a nice dress." And that's what they did. It was Gracie's insight into how to package Anne Margaret. And they went out and got her a sweet dress to change the image that we were going to develop for Anne Margaret. But there's a lot of terrific stories in this book about George. So pick it up if you want to know more about how he helped Anne Margaret. He also helped Bobby Darin and a slew of other people get into the business. Okay.
And as always, the link, if you want to read along with Sal, I put it in the chat window. So you can click there and purchase it from Amazon if you're interested.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? And does anybody know the name Kathy Carr?
No.
Okay, all right. She was a rich socialite from Texas. They struck up a friendship. It was originally, she was basically sending him fan mail. He would answer her fan mail. And then it grew to the point where he said, "Well, if you're ever in LA, come give me a call." They struck up a friendship, and they had it for a good many years, the two of them. Nothing romantic about it. It was just a great friendship. He really cared about her. She cared about him. And people were saying they were trying to compare her to no, she's not a singer. She was a rich socialite, and they were trying to compare her to Erin and who was it? Groucho Marx, and geez, I'm trying to remember who he was with at this point. But somebody will send it in. But she said, "No, I have no interest in marrying George. As a matter of fact, I've got more money than George has." So that was a very, very sweet relationship that the two of them had for companionship. Okay, we got somebody saying that they met George poolside at the Sahara.
Yeah.
And was introducing his protege. Who is the protege?
Anne Margaret.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide because we're coming to the end here. 100 years of show business. You can't even imagine the wealth of talent that he was affiliated with. If you look on the left side, you got Milton Berle, George, Jack Benny, Debbie Reynolds, Groucho Marx, Bob Hope, Lucy, naturally. On the right, there's, again, Jack and George. You're going to see them together all the time. But there's Eddie Cantor and there's Georgie Jessel. If you go to the next slide, Darren. These are the people that he affiliated himself with his entire life. Look on the top left there. Red Buttons, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Jimmy Durante, Al Jolson. On the bottom there, you've got Irving Berlin, Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, Deanna Durbin, Sophie Tucker, Ruby Keeler. This is a history of show business that he was affiliated with. Without George, he was in the middle of all this. They respected his talent. He was part of the talent of that entire generation. Can we go to the next slide, Darren? Very good. How can I put this? Let's see. When he passed away, he died March 9th, 1996. And it was the end of an entertainment era. The style, the talent, the innovation, all the performance we mentioned, they're never going to be achieved again. We're never going to see them again. When we have our lectures together live, that's one of the things that we always talk about, that the level of professionalism and entertainment that we were growing up with, we never knew that it was all going to disappear and there'd be nobody to take their place again. There are no other legends like these people here. I want to give the family an opportunity to have a last word on them. On George?
Well, in lieu of this, George always spoke about how he was going to live to be 100 and how he was booked in London at the Palladium. And unfortunately, he never made it to the Palladium. But at that time, he was already having ill health, but he did die at 100. So there was really a lot of longevity. And I felt very sad when he passed away because I have so many fond memories of things like my father used to, George Burns always sang these little vaudeville songs. And my father would sit in his chair and sing along to the songs. And, but it was just that kind of family. They all, as Amy was saying, they were all very funny and storytelling. And it was a great loss, as any time somebody you love passes. Amy, do you have anything to add?
No, not really. Just, it's weird because I only met him a couple of times in my life, but he really did have a big effect on me. Just because not everybody, as we were saying, is related to such a famous person. And just, he was a very loving person. I never heard anyone in the family, no matter how famous or rich he was, he stayed in touch with his family. My father stayed in touch with him. He was truly a loving person. So that's all I have to say.
That's sweet. Anything, David, from you?
No, they've said it all.
Okay. Just a quick note, Darren, can we have that last slide?
Yep.
I just wanted to show you the influence that George and Gracie had on television. And if you look at these are just a few of the classic comedy husband and wife teams that are on the air, that were on the air. They set the bar for, if you look at Lucy and Desi, their show was based on show business. If you look at Rob and Laura on the Dick Van Dyke Show, their world was set up in show business. The others are just relating to the husband and wife. You didn't always have, when All in the Family came out, they were trying to picture, people were trying to pigeonhole Edith as being like another Gracie, a dingbat. But if you watch that series, she's the heartbeat of that show. She may sound funny, she may sound like Gracie, but she is the heartbeat of that show and she keeps everything going. But because of George and Gracie, all these other shows would not exist. Any last words?
Sal, can I just add one more thing?
No, we're done.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, at least in our family or people that we know, when you have sort of like that little bit of a ditzy personality,
Yeah,
people always say, oh, you're acting just like Gracie Allen. And
yeah.
it's so funny how it just like, carries on. Like I have a friend who, my daughter was like that when she was a child, but I have a friend who also comes out with like very crazy kind of logic. And we always say, okay, Gracie, now what are you going to say? Like I had a fancy milk bottle one time. And when I brought it out, she goes, what supermarket, because I would transfer my milk to the bottle. She goes, what supermarket did you buy it in? So we go, yes, Gracie.
I have one last question for Elise. You're in a different generation. Do people of your generation remember George and Gracie?
I would say my generation does, but at work, like if I'll mention to my colleagues that are 5-10 years younger than me, that I'm related to George Burns, they really don't know who he is, and then if you say like, oh, the comedian with the cigar, then it'll, trigger some kind of memory or image of him. But, it is like, it's not that it's like, you don't want to say dying, but it's kind of like, it doesn't have as big of an impact as it did like when I was a kid growing up and telling my teachers that I was related to him or my friends, because you would always see him on TV from now and then. But the younger generation really doesn't know him and doesn't remember him. So trying to keep that alive, I guess, and trying to remind teach people about him. But I definitely have found that that it's like if I mention it now, it doesn't have as much of an impact.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think that's the reason that our company, St. George Productions, is in existence, because we do want to keep the memory of these great entertainers alive. We do want to keep letting people know what we grew up with was so far superior to what is available today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we say goodbye, I know we've already run long, but I do want to give an opportunity. We have a bunch of questions that have accumulated, and I'd just like to quickly knock them out because we're never going to get this opportunity again. So let's see here. We talked about Anne Margaret. We did hear back from Robert, and he said he talked about George pulling a prank on Jack. Apparently, it seems, well, here it is. Jack came out and talked about his best friend George for almost a half an hour. George then walked on stage unannounced and surprised Jack, and George simply said, I told you just to introduce me. That's it. Now get off the stage.
Yeah.
Jack sat in the orchestra for the rest of the show, and George just told stories about all the practical jokes he's pulled on Jack over the years. That's really nice. Somebody said this is a very lively and well-organized presentation. I love it. Thank you very much. That's nice. We talked again about Anne Margaret, they mentioned. Poolside. Too bad we don't have greats like George anymore. It's true. We keep reiterating that. Is it true that after George passed, when he was buried, did they change the tombstone so that Gracie got top billing?
No idea.
He was buried, I believe, in a crypt, like a mausoleum type drawer. Yeah. And yeah, side by side. And I believe what you said was true.
That's great. Let's see here. Good. Mirror influence him. What's next? Oh, how was their relationship with religion between George and Gracie? Was it ever an issue?
I don't think so.
If there was an issue or not, but I do remember when I was a kid, I was dating a guy who wasn't Jewish, and my mother was extremely upset about it. And one time I was talking to my father and I said, what is she so upset about? Uncle Nat married someone who wasn't Jewish. And my father said, oh, but she had a Jewish heart.
I love it. That's it. There's some other things in here. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everybody's questions, but thank you for everybody for writing in.
And more importantly, thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate this. We have some big surprises coming up in the future. I won't belabor this now, but we do have some real interesting surprises coming up soon. Thank you all. Darren, you can take it away.
Yep. Big thanks. So as always, you can follow us online if you want to keep up to what's going next. You can follow us on Facebook. We are actually streaming to Facebook Live today, so if anybody's more comfortable over there. If you're interested in getting one of those buttons, actually David found this for us this morning. This is the button of Charo from Caesar's Palace that we found. So I'll put that in the link below. You can follow us.
Stage pictures of Charo, though.
Yeah. You can follow us at southstgeorge.com. We have our calendar. Next week, we have the Dick Van Dyke Show that we're going to be talking about. A big thing for everybody to take a look at, if you haven't already, go to YouTube and check for South St. George. You can find all of these lectures. We post them there after they're done. If you want to go back or if you missed one, we have 2 parts right here about Burns and Allen. We have our talking about Sid Caesar and all of Sal's favorite videos from those performers. So thank you, everyone. Here is the link for Charo if you want to get that button. And a big thank you to Amy, to Elise, to the children. It's always nice seeing the other generation there, as well as Wendy and David for your time and for putting all of this together with us. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Elise. Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
We'll see you
you.
next week.
Bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay safe.